Yeah. So I was a postdoc at Stanford right after I got my PhD, and I went to work for a young assistant professor, and her name was Sarah Church. And she had been a postdoc at Caltech, where I would later end up after she fired me, which is not a career direction I recommend your listeners go off on, but that's what happened. I was working for her. She was working on like galaxy clusters, a little bit on polarization. I'd wanted to work only on polarization. And then I had this idea based on a paper by one of my future friends, Mark Haminkowski and others, that you could look for gravitational waves using a very small telescope that wouldn't cost as much money, or cost a fraction of the big telescopes that were being planned for my field. And so I was obsessed with it. I kept thinking about it. How could you build it? What would it look like? What would it do? And she just noticed that I wasn't working very much for her anymore. And yes, she was paying me. Not that much. You know, it was like 30 grand or something. And this is at the height of the first .com bubble. So imagine like the AI bubble that we're in now, but times like 1,000. And that was what the .com bubble was. These companies were, so to get a house near Silicon Valley for a postdoc on $30,000 a year salary before taxes was I was miserable. So I lived like on the train tracks, essentially, and I was almost homeless. I hated it. It was awful. And she could tell, so she fired me one day. Won't get into the details of it, but she did me a great kindness. She sent me for a job appointment with her former postdoctoral advisor, Caltech, who was named Andrew Lang. And he was a really famous scientist. He had just finished measuring the very first observations of the fluctuations in the cosmic microwave background at small scales on this experiment called Boomerang. He was like this incredibly powerful, charismatic guy. He'd come up to Stanford to give lectures on these new discoveries. Everyone thought he was going to win a Nobel Prize. And he invited me to give a talk down at Caltech, a job interview. Went down there, he liked to talk, offered me a job. I said yes before he finished, the sentences coming out of his mouth. Moved down to Caltech, worked there for 3 years. And while I was there, I became friends with a postdoc or a scientist that worked with him named Jamie Bach, who's now a very famous professor and PI of this new satellite called SphereX. And I convinced Jamie of this idea that I had at Stanford to build a small telescope, put it at the South Pole, and observe for 3 to 4 years and set some limit. And we didn't think we'd detect anything. And over time, we hired more and more people, and then we upgraded the instrument like your iPhone. Every year, it gets more pixels, better sensor, or whatever. So we improved it The second generation was called Bicep 2. Same concept, refracting telescope, same location, same optic. Everything was the same, except it had 6 times more detectors. And they were different type. They were superconductors.
It's like a Bicep scaling law.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Yeah. So we did that. Now they're on Bicep, the 4th generation of Bicep. So it's
like a new iPhone model, new Bicep model.
New Bicep. That's right.
Next season.
One last thing.
Yeah, except each copy is handmade and costs millions of dollars. And I came up with the acronym. So the acronym stands for Background Imager of Cosmic Extragalactic Polarization. It's kind of ironic because we ended up measuring galactic polarization, not extragalactic polarization. But be that as it may, we got funding for it, we upgraded it, and then eventually we did detect it. We detected the signal that would be revealing, indicative of gravitational waves. The only way the gravitational waves could get there is if the universe underwent a very brief period, but extremely energetic, incomprehensibly powerful expansion called inflation. This was predicted by Alan Guth, now at MIT, but at the time he was at Stanford also, almost getting fired himself, but then avoiding it and having a much better career than I had. But he ended up predicting this, and we realized that there would be signature of the relic gravitational waves from inflation, and that would imprint the CMB, and we discovered it, and the pattern that it would imprint would be a swirling, so the polarization looks like little sticks.
Do you have an image to show?
In my book, I do, yeah. In the book, you can show the image of the book, where it shows not the intensity, like the color on that plush little animal toy over there, but it shows little sticks. So the polarization is an orientation. It's spin. Photons are spin 1, so they have 2 different orientations, but you can't tell if the electric field's going vertically up or vertically down. You just know the plane of polarization. Like a rope, if you see 2 people shaking a rope, you can't tell, did it start going up or did it start going down? If you look away for it, you can't tell. So we only know the orientation. So at each point on the sky, in addition to the color, meaning the intensity and the frequency, we have an orientation of a stick. And the stick pattern, if they're gravitational waves, would form this swirling pattern called curl mode polarization. So at the gym, I realized you do curls at the gym, right? You know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about. Right. So that's why I called it bicep.
Curls, like for me, it's derivatives. Like
It's named after the bicep. That's very
That's
funny.
right.
That's
so
pretty
it's
funny.
a muscle that does curls, right? So people like that name. And then we upgraded it, but we always thought, oh, we detect it. We have to go back and see if it's really real. It has to be confirmed. Unfortunately, tragically, in 2010, the couple of months weeks after we had deployed the second generation bicep, Andrew Lang, who's my hero, my mentor, like a father figure to me, he committed suicide. So he died in Pasadena. He took his own life at a motel that was the same motel that he had put me up when I stayed to do the job interview 10 years earlier. I mean, it was an incredible kind of coincidence and confluence of events. But one of the things that happened after his death is that there was like a leadership vacuum, and the team of people, some of whom I had hired as, when I was advising Andrew before I left Caltech to come here to UCSD in 2004, they took over the leadership because they were there. I was still one of the, co-investigators, co-leaders of it, and the founder of the Bicep series of projects. But they had, convinced themselves they didn't need me around anymore. And when they made the detection, I was part of the team and on the paper, and I helped, with some of the results, and I had students working on it. But they did not include me in the big press conference and the big, newspaper articles that were written about it. And in hindsight, it was a great blessing for me because it turned out to, spoiler alert, not win the Nobel Prize. I realized I would not win the Nobel Prize like the night that it came out, right before we were going to publish it. Either they would win it and they kick me out and only 3 people can win the Nobel Prize at most, or we were wrong, which is kind of what I was leaning towards, and I kind of wanted to distance it from that at that point. And that's what ended up happening. We saw these micrometeorites that made the same curling pattern of microwave polarization. And we never, really had ways to validate it to make sure we didn't make a mistake, but we kind of let our excitement go ahead and we published it without peer review. We had a press conference, like I said, a very unorthodox way to approach it. But they were worried about being, scooped out of the discovery by the Planck satellite and others, and then losing their Nobel Prize.